The crisp, impossibly thick edge of the invitation was a cruel joke against the calloused skin of her fingers. For 5 years, Serena Washington's world had been the scent of industrial disinfectant and the lonely echo of her footsteps in deserted hallways after midnight. She was a ghost in the machine of Caldwell Innovations, the invisible hand that erased the day's grime. But tonight, Gideon Caldwell, the titan of industry himself, had cornered her by the service elevator, a mocking glint in his eyes. He pressed the invitation into her hand, an invitation to the Aurelian Gala, the city's most exclusive event, and told her to come see how the other half lives. His laughter and that of his cronies still rang in her ears. He meant it as the ultimate humiliation. He had no idea he was inviting a queen back to her stolen kingdom. The Caldwell Tower wasn't just a building. It was a monument to ruthless ambition piercing the Chicago skyline. A spear of smoked glass and burnished steel, it declared its owner's dominance over the city. And every night, from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., Serena Washington was its keeper. Not of its secrets or its stock prices, but of its superficial perfection. She cleaned the smudges from the glass walls that separated powerful men from the rest of the world. She buffed the marble floors they strode across without a downward glance. She emptied the waste bins filled with crumpled deals and remnants of $1,000 lunches. To the building's daytime inhabitants, she was less than a person. She was a function, a necessary but unseen utility. They might notice a floor that wasn't gleaming or a bin that was overflowing, but they would never notice the woman responsible for its state. Serena preferred it this way. Anonymity was a shield. In the vast, silent atrium after hours, surrounded by the towering ficus trees and the faint hum of the building's life support, she could almost forget the woman she used to be. Tonight, however, the silence was shattered. It was 10:45 p.m., and she was preparing her cart in the sub-level service bay when the polished Italian loafers appeared beside a slop bucket. Serena didn't need to look up. The oppressive aura of cologne, Cuban cigar smoke, and sheer, unadulterated arrogance announced Gideon Caldwell's presence long before his voice did. "Well, well, what have we here?" Gideon's voice was a low, self-satisfied rumble. He wasn't alone. Flanking him were Brent Ackman and Kyle Sterling, two of his senior VPs, their sycophantic smirks already in place. Serena slowly straightened up, her face a carefully constructed mask of neutrality. At 42, she still possessed a striking, statuesque grace that no janitor's uniform could fully conceal. High cheekbones, intelligent, deep-set eyes, and a posture that spoke of a discipline long forgotten by the world, but not by her. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, her voice even, "you're working late." "The city never sleeps, and neither does progress," he said, gesturing expansively at the concrete walls around them as if he were presenting a masterpiece. "I was just showing Brent and Kyle the true engine room of this empire, the grit beneath the glamour." His eyes, the color of faded denim, swept over her with dismissive amusement. "Speaking of glamour," he reached into the inner pocket of his bespoke suit jacket and pulled out a heavy cream-colored envelope embossed with a golden sunburst. "I find myself with a spare invitation. My +1, a certain Swedish model, has unfortunately contracted a rather inconvenient case of the flu." He paused for the expected chuckle from his lackeys. It came on cue. "The Aurelian Gala, Saturday night. It's a charity benefit, but really it's the party of the year. We're celebrating the final approval for the Solstice Tower project." He waved the invitation like a matador's cape. "I feel a sudden burst of, what's the word? Philanthropy. I think one of my hardest working employees should get a glimpse of the good life, a little motivational peek behind the curtain." He stepped forward, the expensive leather of his shoes scuffing the dusty floor. He didn't hand her the invitation. He held it out, forcing her to take a step toward him, to reach for it. The power play was as subtle as a sledgehammer. Serena's eyes flickered from the invitation to his smug face. The joke was painfully clear. He imagined her showing up in her worn-out shoes and a cheap dress, a pathetic creature to be pitied and mocked. He wanted to parade his magnanimity while simultaneously putting a lower-class woman in a humiliating spotlight. It was a special kind of cruelty, the kind reserved for those who believe they are gods. "I don't think that would be appropriate, sir," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. Nonsense, Gideon boomed, his smile widening. He saw her refusal not as dignity, but as fear, and it delighted him. I insist. Come on, take it. It's the least I can do. He finally pushed the envelope into her hand. The thick cardstock felt alien, a relic from a different universe. Brent and Kyle were snickering openly now. Yeah, Sarah, Brent drawled, mispronouncing her name as Sarah. You should come. The canapes are to die for. I doubt you've ever had real Caspian caviar. Her hand closed around the envelope. Her knuckles were white. Every instinct screamed at her to tear it to shreds and throw it in his perfectly handsome, utterly vile face. She wanted to tell him that she had dined in Michelin-starred restaurants in Paris, that she had forgotten more about art and culture than he would ever know. She wanted to scream, but she didn't. Instead, a different idea, cold and sharp as a shard of ice, began to form in the desolate landscape of her mind. An idea so audacious, so terrifying, that it made her heart hammer against her ribs. The Solstice Tower. He had mentioned the Solstice Tower. The name was a phantom limb, an ache that had never truly faded. She looked up, meeting Gideon Caldwell's gaze directly. The mask of the deferential janitor slipped back into place. Thank you, Mr. Caldwell, she said, her voice smooth as glass. That's very generous of you. His triumph was absolute. He had won. He had forced the little janitor to accept his charity. Excellent. Don't be late. Security is tight. He winked. Just tell them Gideon Caldwell invited you personally. They'll get a kick out of that. With a final, booming laugh, he turned and led his entourage toward the private elevator, their self-congratulatory chatter echoing in the concrete bay. Serena stood frozen, the heavy invitation in her hand. It felt less like a piece of paper and more like a weapon. He thought he was inviting a janitor. He thought he was setting a stage for her humiliation. The bitter irony was that he was. But the humiliation, she vowed, would not be hers. He had just invited a ghost to a feast, and she was about to remind everyone in that glittering room what she was capable of haunting. The Solstice Tower, his crowning achievement, her stolen masterpiece. The invitation lay on the scarred surface of her small kitchen table, an island of opulent promise in a sea of humble reality. Her apartment was a fifth-floor walk-up in Pilsen, a place of vibrant murals, hard-working families, and the distant rumble of the L train. It was clean, meticulously organized, but spare. The only hints of a different life were the books, heavy tomes on structural engineering, architectural theory, and art history, their spines worn with love and study. For 2 days, the invitation mocked her. To go was insane. It was a fool's errand, a walk into the lion's den with no armor. To not go felt like a surrender, an admission that Gideon Caldwell had successfully broken the last vestiges of her spirit. She traced the embossed golden sunburst, the logo of the Aurelian Gala. It was meant to symbolize hope and new beginnings. For her, it felt like a brand, marking the very people who had plunged her life into darkness. The Solstice Tower. The name echoed in her mind, a relentless, painful drumbeat. It wasn't just a building to her. It was the culmination of a decade of work, the magnum opus of her former life. It was the reason she now wore a janitor's uniform instead of a designer suit. On Thursday, her day off, she found herself on a bus heading to a part of the city she hadn't visited in 5 years. She got off in front of a climate-controlled storage facility, a sterile, anonymous building that held the wreckage of her past. The roll-up metal door shrieked in protest as she heaved it open, revealing stacks of boxes, drafting tubes, and shrouded furniture. The air inside was stale, thick with the dust of dormant dreams. She navigated to the back, her fingers trailing over a box labeled Aura Blueprints, and knelt before a long, flat wardrobe box. With a deep breath, she sliced the tape and folded back the cardboard flaps. Inside, nestled in layers of acid-free tissue paper, was a dress. It wasn't just a dress, it was a statement. A column of midnight blue silk velvet that fell like liquid night. It had a daring, asymmetrical neckline and a single breathtaking detail, a cascade of hand-stitched silver beadwork that coiled down one side like a celestial nebula, mimicking the path of the winter solstice sun. She had designed it herself, a collaboration with a young, aspiring couturier for a gala she was meant to attend 5 years ago. The gala to celebrate the announcement of her firm winning the Solstice Tower bid, a celebration that never happened. Touching the cool, plush fabric was like touching a ghost. It brought everything rushing back with the force of a physical blow. Flashback. 6 years ago, Serena Washington was the senior partner and creative force behind Aura Designs, a boutique architectural firm shaking up Chicago's conservative scene. She and her junior partner, Finn Davies, were the perfect team. She was the visionary, the artist who could see poetry in load-bearing walls and skylights. Finn was the charmer, the salesman, the one who could navigate the treacherous waters of city politics and investor relations. He was also the man she loved, the man with whom she shared a loft, a business, and a future. Their masterpiece was the proposal for the Solstice Tower. It wasn't just another skyscraper. Serena's design was revolutionary. It was a bioclimatic structure, designed to work with the sun's path throughout the year. On the winter solstice, the shortest day of the year, a unique arrangement of reflective panels and light wells would capture the low-slung sun and channel it down through the central atrium, bathing the core of the building in natural light. It was sustainable, beautiful, and profoundly human. It was her soul rendered in steel and glass. They poured everything into the pitch. Months of sleepless nights, endless revisions, and a financial gamble that put the firm on a knife's edge. Finn was brilliant in the boardroom, captivating the development committee. But it was Serena's vision, her passionate explanation of the design's philosophy, that won them the contract. They won. The news came on a Tuesday afternoon. They had beaten 3 of the largest, most powerful firms in the country. That night, they celebrated with champagne, their bodies and dreams intertwined in the exhilarating reality of their success. The future was a limitless, sun-drenched horizon. The collapse came 2 weeks later. It was brutally swift. One morning, Serena arrived at the office to find it empty. The servers were wiped. The physical blueprints were gone. The firm's bank accounts were drained. A note was on her desk, not from Finn, but from a lawyer. Finn had dissolved their partnership, and he had disappeared. Frantic, she called the development committee. A polite, pitying secretary informed her that Aura Designs had officially withdrawn its bid, citing internal restructuring and an inability to meet the project's demands. The contract was immediately awarded to the runner-up. Within a month, the truth, or a twisted version of it, surfaced. Finn had reappeared, not in Chicago, but in New York. He had taken her design, her soul, and sold it. Not the whole thing, but the core innovative concepts, the very heart of the Solstice Tower. He sold it to a behemoth, Caldwell Innovations. Gideon Caldwell, known for his aggressive acquisition of smaller companies and ideas, had paid Finn a fortune for the proprietary bioclimatic technology and a non-disclosure agreement thicker than a phone book. The betrayal was absolute. It wasn't just professional, it was a profound violation of love and trust. Finn had not only stolen her work, he had stolen her life. She tried to fight it. She hired a lawyer with what little money she had left, but she was outmatched and outmaneuvered. Caldwell's legal team was a legion. They countersued her for harassment and intellectual property theft, claiming she was the disgruntled ex-employee trying to steal their newly acquired technology. They buried her in paperwork, in depositions, in threats. Finn, protected by his NDA and Caldwell's legal shield, was untouchable. She lost everything. Her firm, her reputation, her savings, her home. The lawsuit left her bankrupt and broken. The architectural community, swayed by Caldwell's power and the whispers of her instability, turned its back on her. The only work she could find was anonymous, physical labor that required no resume, no references, no soul. She became a janitor, and in a stroke of cosmic cruelty, the agency she signed with placed her in the one building where she would be a constant, invisible witness to the success of the man who had bought her stolen dreams. The Caldwell Tower, present day. Back in the storage unit, Serena closed her eyes, the scent of dust and memory filling her lungs. The dress was more than just silk and beads. It was the armor for a battle she had run from 5 years ago. Gideon Caldwell was celebrating the final approval of the Solstice Tower, her Solstice Tower. He had likely modified the design, slapped his own name on it, and was presenting it as his visionary masterpiece. And was Finn still connected to Caldwell? Would he be at the gala? The thought sent a jolt of ice and fire through her veins. The decision was no longer a decision. It was a calling, a duty. She carefully lifted the dress from its cardboard coffin. It was pristine, a perfect, unfulfilled promise. She didn't have money for a celebrity stylist or a limousine, but she had something more valuable. She had the burning, righteous fury of a creator whose work had been desecrated. She had the mind that had conceived the Solstice Tower in the first place. Gideon Caldwell wanted to put the janitor on display. Fine, she would attend his glorious party, but the woman who walked through those doors would not be the invisible cleaner he mocked in the basement. She would be Serena Washington, the architect of Aura Designs, and she was coming to claim what was hers. The 2 days leading up to the gala were a blur of focused, clandestine activity. Serena's small apartment transformed into a war room. Her mission was not simply to show up, but to arrive. The distinction was critical. Showing up was what Gideon expected, a pitiful, out-of-place woman. Arriving was an act of power, a disruption of the established order. First, the dress. The midnight blue velvet was timeless, but 5 years in storage had left it with a faint mustiness. She couldn't afford professional dry cleaning. Instead, she used her knowledge of fabrics and chemistry, steaming it carefully in her bathroom until the velvet pile was raised and flawless, its deep color absorbing all light. She spent an entire evening with a magnifying glass and a fine needle, checking and reinforcing every single silver bead on the celestial cascade. The dress had to be more than perfect. It had to be armor. Next, her appearance. Her savings were meager, barely enough to cover rent and utilities, with a little left for emergencies. This qualified. She spent $40 on a home hair dye kit, restoring her hair to a rich, glossy black that shimmered under the light. She spent another $50 on high-quality drugstore makeup, relying on skill rather than brand names. She watched online tutorials for hours, not on trendy looks, but on classic sculptural techniques, how to use contour and highlight to emphasize her strong bone structure, how to create a smoky eye that was dramatic but not garish, how to achieve the perfect, bold red lip. It was architecture on a human canvas. Her hands were a problem. 5 years of harsh chemicals and manual labor had left them rough, the nails short and practical. She spent hours soaking them, exfoliating with a sugar scrub she made herself, and meticulously filing and shaping her nails. She couldn't afford a professional manicure, so she bought a single bottle of deep crimson polish and applied it with the steady hand of a drafter, inking a final drawing. The biggest challenge was jewelry. The dress was a statement, but it needed support. Her real jewelry had been sold long ago to pay legal fees. Rummaging through a box of mementos, she found a pair of long, sterling silver earrings from her college days, geometric and modernist. They were tarnished, but an overnight soak in a paste of baking soda and water restored their gleam. They were simple, elegant, and authentic. They were hers. On Saturday evening, as the city's elite were being chauffeured to the Lakeside Grand Pavilion, Serena began her transformation. She worked with the intense concentration of an artist finishing a masterpiece. When she was done, she looked in the full-length mirror she had propped against her living room wall. The woman staring back was a stranger, and yet more herself than she had been in years. The janitor was gone. The defeated victim was gone. In their place stood a woman of breathtaking elegance and formidable presence. The velvet dress clung to her tall, strong frame, the silver beadwork glittering like a captured galaxy. Her hair was swept up in a complex, yet seemingly effortless chignon. Her face was a study in contrast, the fierce intelligence in her eyes amplified by the subtle smoky shadow, the unyielding line of her jaw softened only by the bold curve of her lips. She looked regal, powerful, and utterly in command. There would be no limousine. At 9:15 p.m., she walked down the 5 flights of stairs, her sensible work heels exchanged for a pair of classic black pumps she'd owned for a decade. She stepped out onto the bustling street and hailed a yellow cab. The driver, a man with a weary face, did a double take as she slid into the back seat. "Where to, ma'am?" he asked, his tone suddenly infused with a respect she hadn't heard addressed to her in half a decade. "The Lakeside Grand Pavilion," she said, her voice calm and clear. The ride was a journey through different worlds. They left the vibrant, gritty streets of Pilsen, moving through the canyons of the Loop, and finally along the sweeping, majestic curve of Lakeshore Drive. The Grand Pavilion was ablaze with light, a crystalline palace on the edge of the dark, vast expanse of Lake Michigan. A fleet of black town cars, Bentleys, and Rolls-Royces idled near the entrance, disgorging men in tuxedos and women in gowns worth more than her annual salary. Her taxi, humble and yellow, was waved away from the main entrance by a frantic valet. "Service entrance is around back," he yelled. Serena leaned forward. "Pull up right there," she commanded the driver, pointing to a small gap in the queue of luxury vehicles directly in front of the red carpet. "But he said, I'm an invited guest of Gideon Caldwell. Pull up." There was an authority in her voice that brooked no argument. The driver swallowed and nudged the taxi into the spot. A valet in a red jacket rushed over, his face a mask of annoyance, ready to berate them. He bent down to the window and his mouth fell open. He saw not a lost tourist, but a queen. Serena paid the driver, adding a generous tip. "Thank you," she said. She took a single calming breath, opened the door, and stepped out. The effect was immediate and seismic. A ripple of silence spread through the immediate vicinity. The cacophony of chatter, laughter, and camera flashes faltered. People turned. Who was she? She wasn't a recognizable actress, not a society heiress, not a politician's wife. She was an unknown, and in this world the unknown was more intriguing than the familiar. She walked not with the hesitancy of an outsider, but with the deliberate, unhurried grace of someone who owned any room she entered. The midnight blue velvet of her dress seemed to drink the light, making her a figure of stunning contrast against the blazing entrance. The silver beadwork caught the flash bulbs of the paparazzi, who were now aiming their lenses at her out of sheer, baffled curiosity, and scattered light like diamonds. At the top of the steps stood Gideon Caldwell himself, preening for a television news crew. He was laughing, one arm around a statuesque blonde who was clearly not suffering from the flu. He felt the shift in the atmosphere, the sudden lull in the crowd's energy. Annoyed at the interruption, he turned his head. His eyes found Serena as she ascended the final step. The smile on his face didn't just fade, it evaporated, collapsing inward. His jaw went slack. The blood drained from his face, leaving his expensive tan looking sallow and yellow under the bright lights. He saw the dress. He saw the face. He saw the posture. But it was impossible. He was looking at his janitor. But this was not his janitor. This was a goddess of vengeance, and she was walking straight toward him. The reporter next to him noticed his stunned silence. "Mr. Caldwell, do you know this woman? She's stunning." Gideon couldn't speak. He could only stare as Serena reached the entrance, gave him a slow, deliberate nod that was both a greeting and a threat, and swept past him into the glittering heart of the gala. The grand ballroom of the pavilion was a breathtaking spectacle of calculated excess. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the vaulted ceiling, casting a fractured, golden light over the sea of Chicago's most powerful people. The air hummed with the sound of a string quartet, the clinking of champagne flutes, and the low murmur of 1,000 conversations about money, power, and influence. Serena paused just inside the doorway, a deliberate tactic. She let the room see her, let them wonder. Whispers erupted like brush fires. "Who is that? Is she with the delegation from Dubai? I feel like I should know her, but I can't place the face." Her anonymity, once a shield for her shame, was now her greatest weapon. She was a mystery, and in a room where everyone's story was known and monetized, a mystery was irresistible. She accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter, holding the flute with an easy elegance that belied the fact she hadn't tasted champagne in 5 years. Her eyes scanned the room, not with the wide-eyed awe of a tourist, but with the sharp, analytical gaze of a predator. She wasn't here for the caviar or the string quartet. She was hunting. It didn't take long for Gideon to find her. He had extricated himself from the news crew, his face now a thunderous mask of fury. He cornered her near a massive ice sculpture of the Caldwell Innovations logo. "What is the meaning of this?" he hissed, his voice low and venomous. He grabbed her arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "What kind of game are you playing? Where did you get that dress?" Serena didn't flinch. She slowly turned her head and looked down at his hand on her arm, her expression one of utter disdain. Then she met his eyes, her own gaze as cold and hard as the ice sculpture beside them. "Take your hand off me, Mr. Caldwell," she said, her voice dangerously soft, "or this game, as you call it, will become very public, very quickly." For a second, he looked like he might challenge her, but the sheer, unblinking intensity in her eyes made him recoil. He snatched his hand back as if he'd been burned. "You have no right to be here like this," he snarled. "You invited me," she reminded him coolly. "You insisted. Come see how the other half lives, I believe you said. Well, I'm here, and I must say it's all terribly familiar." She took a delicate sip of her champagne, her eyes never leaving his. "But then, I used to live here, before my life's work was stolen and repackaged as someone else's triumph." Gideon's face paled further. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you?" Serena's smile was razor thin. "The Solstice Tower. A magnificent concept, truly visionary. Tell me, when you give your big speech tonight, will you be able to explain the principles of heliostatic reflection or the passive solar load calculations? Or will you just talk about profit margins? I'm genuinely curious." Panic flickered in Gideon's eyes. He was a businessman, a deal maker. He understood numbers and leverage, not art or science. He bought visions. He didn't create them. "You're delusional," he sputtered. "Security." He started to raise his hand. "I wouldn't," Serena said calmly, "'cause a scene and everyone here will want to know why the great Gideon Caldwell is so terrified of a woman in a blue dress. They might start asking questions, and I have so many answers." She turned her back on him, a gesture of ultimate dismissal, and glided away into the crowd, leaving him fuming and impotent by his melting logo. Her primary target was still missing. She needed to find Finn Davies, but first she needed an ally, a witness. Her eyes scanned the room again, this time searching for a specific face, a long shot. And then she saw her, Isabel Roche, the legendary architectural critic for the Chicago Tribune. A woman in her late 60s with a severe silver bob, owlish glasses, and a reputation for being incorruptible. She could make or break a building, or an architect, with a single perfectly crafted paragraph. She was standing alone, observing the party with an expression of wry detachment. Serena knew this was her only chance. Taking a deep breath, she approached. "Ms. Roche?" Isabel turned, her sharp eyes appraising Serena from head to toe. "Yes? My name is Serena Washington." Isabel's brow furrowed slightly. "The name is familiar, from a long time ago. Aura Designs. You disappeared." Hope surged in Serena's chest. She hadn't been completely erased. "I didn't disappear, Ms. Roche. I was buried." Isabel's gaze sharpened with interest. "Go on." "I'm here tonight because Gideon Caldwell is celebrating the final approval for his Solstice Tower. A derivative, if ambitious, project," Isabel sniffed. "It has some clever ideas at its core, but they feel disconnected, like a beautiful melody played by a musician with no soul." "The soul was ripped out," Serena said, her voice trembling slightly with suppressed emotion. "Ms. Rush, the core concept of the Solstice Tower, the bioclimatic design, the light wells, the entire philosophy of the building, it's mine. It was the winning proposal my firm, Aura Designs, submitted 6 years ago, before it was stolen." Isabel stared at her, her expression unreadable. She had heard 100 stories like this, tales of theft and betrayal. Most were delusions of grandeur. But there was something in this woman's eyes, a fire, a profound and painful truth, that commanded belief. "That's a very serious accusation, Ms. Washington. Do you have any proof?" "The original digital blueprints, dated and time-stamped, are on a hard drive in a secure location. My own mind is proof. Ask me any question about the design, any detail, and I can answer it. Ask Gideon Caldwell the same question. She leaned closer. But more than that, the man who brokered the deal, who sold my work to Caldwell, is here tonight. My former partner, Finian Davies. Just as she said his name, a shift in the crowd near the main bar revealed him. Finn looked older. The boyish charm had curdled into a kind of slick, nervous energy. He was wearing an expensive tuxedo that seemed a size too tight, and he laughed a little too loudly at something a man beside him said. Isabel followed her gaze. The man from a real estate holding company? I've seen him at these things. A parasite. He was my partner, Serena said softly, the words tasting like ash. And my fiancé. Isabel's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. The entire story clicked into place. The professional betrayal, the personal devastation, the powerful man who profited, the woman who was erased. It was a classic, brutal Chicago story. Mr. Caldwell is scheduled to give the keynote address in 20 minutes, Isabel said, her voice now crisp and decisive. He'll be unveiling new renderings of the tower. What is your plan, Ms. Washington? He's expecting me to make a scene, Serena replied. He's wrong. I'm not here to cause a scene. I'm here to correct the record. Her eyes locked onto Finn across the room. He hadn't seen her yet. The lion's den was set. The players were in place, and the ghost was ready to speak. The ballroom lights dimmed, and a respectful hush fell over the crowd. A spotlight found the stage at the far end of the room, where a lectern stood before a massive projection screen, displaying the shimmering, stylized logo of Caldwell Innovations. Gideon Caldwell, having recomposed himself into a mask of beaming confidence, strode onto the stage to thunderous applause. Serena watched from the side of the room, positioned near a marble column, partially obscured but with a clear view of both the stage and her two targets. Isabel Roche stood a few feet away, her arms crossed, her expression that of a hawk waiting for the opportune moment to strike. Across the room, Finn Davies looked relieved, basking in the reflected glory of his benefactor, believing the strange, beautiful woman from earlier was just a fleeting anomaly. Thank you, Gideon began, his voice booming with false sincerity. Friends, partners, visionaries. Tonight we stand not just in a beautiful ballroom, but at the dawn of a new era for Chicago's skyline. Serena took a deep breath. It was time. She began to move, not towards the stage, but towards Finn. She moved with the same silent, deliberate grace she had used on her arrival, weaving through the captivated audience. Gideon continued his speech, his words a well-rehearsed symphony of corporate buzzwords. Vision, innovation, synergy, a commitment to a greener future. These are the pillars upon which we build. And our next great project, the Solstice Tower, is the ultimate expression of that vision. As he spoke, Serena reached Finn's side. She didn't tap his shoulder or call his name. She simply stood beside him, her presence a sudden drop in temperature. Hello, Finn, she said softly. Finian Davies froze. The voice. He knew that voice. It was a voice from his nightmares, the voice he had spent 5 years and millions of dollars trying to forget. He turned his head slowly, his face ashen. The charming smile he wore for the public dissolved into raw, naked panic. Sarah, he whispered, his voice catching in his throat. What? How are you here? You look like the woman whose life you destroyed? She finished for him, her voice a blade of ice. Funny how that happens. You clean up well too. Betrayal seems to agree with you. On stage, an image flashed onto the screen behind Gideon, a sleek, computer-generated rendering of the Solstice Tower. It was beautiful, but it was a soulless copy. The lines were harsher, the core concept commercialized. I don't know what you mean, Finn stammered, his eyes darting around, terrified of who might be listening. That was all a long time ago. A business disagreement. A business disagreement? Serena's laugh was a bitter, quiet sound. You called dissolving our firm, stealing my life's work, selling it for parts, and leaving me to be legally crucified a business disagreement? You were always good with words, Finn, just not your own. Gideon's voice droned on. The tower's unique design, a concept developed in-house by my brilliant team, harnesses the very power of the sun. He has no idea what he's talking about, does he? Serena said, her eyes fixed on the stage. He doesn't know that the angle of the primary light reflector is precisely 23.5 degrees to match the axial tilt of the Earth. He doesn't know that the name solstice isn't a marketing gimmick. It's the entire functional principle of the building. But you know that, don't you, Finn? You were there when I sketched it on a napkin in that little Italian restaurant on Taylor Street. Tears pricked at Finn's eyes, not of remorse, but of sheer terror. His world was collapsing. Please, Sarah, don't do this. He'll ruin me. He'll ruin us both. There is no us, she said, the finality in her voice like a slammed door. You torched that bridge. You just never thought I'd learn how to rise from the ashes. She turned from him then, leaving him trembling and broken. Her moment had come. While Gideon was basking in the applause for the rendering, Serena moved with purpose towards the small set of stairs at the side of the stage. The two security guards, massive men in black suits, moved to block her. Ma'am, you can't go up there. Serena didn't break her stride. She looked them in the eye. Gideon Caldwell invited me. He told me to tell you he sent me personally. He said you'd get a kick out of it. She used his own arrogant words against them. The guards hesitated, confused. In that moment of hesitation, she was past them and on the stage. Gideon had just turned to accept the adulation of the crowd when he saw her. The color drained from his face for the second time that night. The applause faltered as the audience realized something unplanned and extraordinary was happening. Serena walked not to the main lectern, but to the moderator's smaller podium nearby, which had its own microphone. She switched it on. A soft feedback hum echoed through the silent room. A beautiful speech, Mr. Caldwell, she said, her voice amplified, clear and steady. It carried none of the hysteria he expected, but a chilling, resonant authority. And a beautiful building. It truly is a testament to a singular vision. Gideon stood frozen, paralyzed by a mixture of rage and fear. But I believe in giving credit where credit is due, Serena continued, her eyes sweeping over the stunned faces in the audience. My name is Serena Washington, and 5 years ago, I was the head architect and founder of a firm called Aura Designs. A collective gasp went through the room. Isabel Roche, near the front, pulled out a small notepad and began writing furiously. The Solstice Tower, Serena said, her voice ringing with the passion of its creator, was my design, my vision. My firm was awarded the contract before my partner, Mr. Finian Davies. She gestured calmly toward the spot where Finn was now trying to shrink into the floor. Stole the plans, dissolved our company, and sold the core concepts to Mr. Caldwell. A roar of murmurs filled the ballroom. This was better than gossip. This was a corporate execution. Lies! Gideon finally found his voice, shouting into his microphone. She's a disgruntled former employee, a nobody, a janitor. The word janitor hung in the air. Instead of shaming her, it electrified the room. They looked at the regal woman on the stage, at her poise, her elegance, and then at the sputtering billionaire. The story became instantly, tragically clear. Yes, Serena said, her voice softening but losing none of its power. For the past 5 years, I have been a janitor. In your building, Mr. Caldwell. I have cleaned the floors you walk on, and every night I have walked through the ghost of my own stolen dream. She turned to the crowd. He thinks calling me a janitor is an insult, but I see it as a testament to my survival. What he can't understand is that you can take a person's money, you can take their company, you can even take their name, but you cannot take their genius. She reached into the small, elegant clutch bag she carried. She pulled out a slim, modern smartphone. With a few taps, she activated its screen-sharing capability. She had hacked into the pavilion's public Wi-Fi an hour ago. The renderings you see are a pale imitation, she said. The image of Caldwell's tower behind them flickered and was replaced by a new image, broadcast from her phone. It was a digital scan of a hand-drawn sketch, intricate and breathtakingly detailed. It was dated and signed, S. Washington, Aura Designs, 2019. This is the soul of the building. She swiped in original blueprints, covered in her own annotations and calculations, filled the screen. The proof was undeniable, broadcast for the entire world of Chicago Power to see. Gideon Caldwell stood speechless, his face a mask of utter ruin. He was exposed, a fraud stripped bare in the spotlight he had so desperately craved. Serena switched off the microphone. Her work was done. She turned and walked calmly off the stage, past the stunned guards, through the chaotic, buzzing crowd that parted for her as if she were royalty. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Behind her, a kingdom was falling. Serena didn't run. She walked. The act itself was a declaration. She moved with a measured, almost serene pace out of the grand ballroom, a silent, solitary vessel navigating the turbulent wake of the explosion she had just detonated. The crowd, moments before a unified monolith of elite society, was now a fractured chaos of frantic whispers, panicked phone calls, and stunned disbelief. They parted for her, a sea of tuxedos and silk gowns pulling back, as if she carried a magnetic charge. She could feel their eyes on her back, a mixture of awe, pity, and for those closely allied with Caldwell, raw fear. She passed through the grand lobby where staff stood frozen like statues in a tragedy, trays of champagne forgotten in their hands. The heavy glass doors swung open before her, and she stepped out into the cool, cleansing air of the Chicago night. The oppressive, perfumed atmosphere of the gala was instantly replaced by the clean, earthy scent of Lake Michigan and the distant rhythmic hum of the city. She took a deep, shuddering breath. The air had never tasted so sweet. It was the air of freedom. The adrenaline began to recede during the cab ride home, leaving behind a profound exhaustion and the trembling, delayed shock of her own audacity. The woman in the midnight blue dress reflected in the taxi window looked both familiar and entirely new. Triumph was not a simple, clean feeling, she realized. It was complex, laced with the sorrow for the years she had lost, and the dawning, terrifying reality of the war she had just officially declared. She hadn't just won a battle, she had set the entire board on fire. By the time she had climbed the 5 flights of stairs to her apartment, her story had already escaped the confines of the gala and gone viral. Isabel Roche's first tweet, sharp and lethal as a sniper's bullet, had landed. At Aurelian Gala, a ghost from Chicago's architectural past, Serena Washington, just publicly accused Gideon Caldwell of stealing her design for the Solstice Tower, and she brought receipts. Story to follow, Cuner's Caldwell Gate. The next morning, the world had changed. A phalanx of news vans with satellite dishes sprouting from their roofs had besieged her quiet Pilsen street. Reporters shouted questions at her window, their voices muffled by the glass. The intermittent flash of a telephoto lens felt like a strobe light in her humble living room. For 5 years, she had perfected the art of being invisible. Now she was the most visible woman in Chicago. It was overwhelming, but not frightening. She calmly unplugged her landline and silenced her phone, which was vibrating itself off the table with a constant stream of notifications. Amidst the chaos, a single email stood out. It was from Arthur Chen, one of the city's most respected corporate litigators, known for taking on Goliaths on behalf of Davids. The subject line was simple: "I believe you. Let's talk." Isabel Roche's front-page article in the Tribune landed 2 days later. It was a masterpiece of journalistic fury, titled "The Ghost in the Glass Tower." It didn't just report the events, it wove a narrative of breathtaking injustice and heroic defiance. Roche had artfully contrasted Serena's detailed, passionate descriptions of the Solstice design with quotes from Gideon Caldwell's past interviews, where he spoke of architecture in the bloodless terms of asset acquisition and ROI. The article made Serena a folk hero and Gideon a cartoon villain. Reading it, Serena felt a validation so profound it brought tears to her eyes. She wasn't just a janitor with a grievance. She was an artist whose voice was finally being heard. Her first meeting with Arthur Chen and his team was in a discreet law office overlooking Millennium Park. They expected a fragile victim. They found a brilliant, focused collaborator. She arrived not with a box of tissues, but with a meticulously organized hard drive containing every blueprint, every email, every scrap of data from her Aura Designs days. She explained her work with a precision that left the young associates scribbling furious notes. She wasn't just the heart of the case, she was its strategic mind. The article and the looming lawsuit opened the floodgates. The class action suit began to form, a coalition of the professionally wounded. There was a young software designer who saw his proprietary code appear in a Caldwell Innovations app 6 months after a failed job interview. There was an experienced structural engineer who had been fired and blacklisted after raising safety concerns about Caldwell's cost-cutting measures on another project. Their stories, once whispered in fear, were now being shouted in a chorus of legal affidavits. Finn Davies, the linchpin of the entire deceit, crumbled. Tracked down by investigative reporters to a luxury condo in Miami, he initially blustered and denied everything. But Arthur Chen's legal team filed an injunction to freeze his assets, and the threat of perjury and a long prison sentence was too much for his weak constitution to bear. His confession, when it came, was total. In a sworn deposition, the video of which was promptly leaked, a weeping Finn detailed the entire conspiracy, painting a pathetic portrait of a man seduced by greed and terrified of his powerful benefactor. 3 months after the gala, Serena entered the Thurgood Marshall courthouse. She wore a simple tailored gray suit, her only adornment the modernist silver earrings from her past. Gideon Caldwell sat at the opposing table, looking deflated. The swagger was gone, replaced by the pallor of a man who sees the abyss opening beneath him. His high-priced lawyer attempted to paint Serena as a vengeful ex-lover, a fantasist clinging to a failed business. On the stand, under the harsh lights of cross-examination, Serena was immovable. "Ms. Washington," the lawyer sneered, "isn't it true that your relationship with Mr. Davies ended poorly? That this entire claim is nothing more than a woman scorned?" Serena looked not at the lawyer but at the jury. "My relationship with Mr. Davies ended the moment he chose to commit grand larceny against the company we built together. My heart has nothing to do with this. This is about the theft of intellectual property. This is about my work." When asked to explain the complex heliostatic principles of her design, she did so with such eloquent simplicity that everyone in the room understood it. She didn't just know the design, she was the design. The judgment was a landmark. The court recognized her as the sole architectural author of the Solstice Tower concept and awarded her damages that effectively broke the back of Caldwell Innovations. Gideon, facing a mountain of further lawsuits and a federal investigation, was ruined. But the true victory came a month later. A new consortium, Petrova Development, run by the formidable and fiercely ethical Elena Petrova, had acquired the stalled Solstice project from the wreckage of Caldwell's holdings. Elena requested a meeting. They met at the Art Institute, standing before a painting by Georgia O'Keeffe. "I've admired your story, Ms. Washington," Elena said, her voice direct and respectful. "But I've admired your work for longer. I remember the original buzz around Aura Designs. Your talent was obvious then, and your courage is obvious now." She didn't offer a settlement to make the problem go away. She offered a partnership. "The city needs this building," Elena said, "but it needs to be built with integrity. It needs its soul back. We want to hire your firm to see this project through to completion, with full creative control. Your name, your vision, your tower." 6 months after walking into a party as a joke, Serena Washington stood on the sprawling, muddy construction site on the shore of Lake Michigan. The air was filled with the clang of steel and the shouts of workers. She wore a white hard hat and sturdy boots, a set of rolled-up blueprints tucked under her arm. The newly erected sign at the site entrance whipped in the wind, its bold letters a symbol of a promise fulfilled. The Solstice Tower, a vision by Serena Washington. Lead architect, Aura Designs, LLC. She had reopened her firm in a sun-drenched loft, hiring a small, brilliant team who looked at her with reverence. She had been to the midnight depths, a ghost polishing the floors of another man's monument to a crime. But now she stood in the bright light of morning, the architect of her own destiny, building her masterpiece not on stolen dreams, but on the unshakable foundation of her own reclaimed truth. The sun was rising, and she was ready to build towards it. That's the incredible story of Serena Washington, a woman they tried to erase. It's a powerful reminder that titles, wealth, and status are just fleeting illusions. True value lies in what you create, in the genius you carry within you, and in the resilience to fight for your truth. even when the world has counted you out. Gideon Caldwell thought he could crush her spirit with a cruel joke, but all he did was hand her the key to unlock her own power. Her story proves that you can be pushed down, betrayed, and stripped of everything, but your inner light, your soul's work, can never truly be stolen. It's a fire that, given a single spark, can burn down an unjust empire and build a new world from its ashes. What did you think of Serena's epic comeback? Let us know in the comments below. If her story of justice and resilience inspired you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more unforgettable real-life stories.